quite an interesting topic, I think, wherever you are in the world.
Absolutely. So I think we live so much of our lives online now.
Yeah.
And so many of the services that we use or we interact with are based on technology, even if we don't interact with them in a digital way. So let's say we ourselves don't have a smartphone, don't kind of connect online. Actually, the behind the scenes of the service where we're talking with and working with people is usually technology led.
Yeah.
So in that context, I think it's really important that those services work for people, that when they are using technology or digital or design, that is done well. Because I think public services and other essential services are really valuable, and people deserve to have a good and easy experience with them. And at the same time, I think those services should also be available to people who don't want to interact with them digitally.
Yeah. Because I think one of the challenges, I suppose, from a societal point of view is accessibility, right? And in terms of how do you ensure services are accessible for all sectors of society, right? With demographics, and here in the UK we have, a challenge of, for example, a big thing around rural access to the internet, broadband, etc. Then we have demographic challenges around people from a lower income groups, or maybe older income groups. So there's lots, or older age groups. Sorry. So there's lots of different challenges. How do you ensure that that is still at the forefront of decision making, etc. That is still considered, even as there is this push to digitize services, so to speak.
Absolutely. I think honestly it comes down to the principle of being user-centered or human-centered, whichever flavor of that you choose. And what that means is that the service has to be, as you've sort of implied, accessible to everyone, which means there are a number of people, it could be a really high proportion of users who can use it online. Perhaps they can use it straight away, no problem. Perhaps they have someone who can help them do, or helps them do things online. But for those people, it can be provided that way. And for people who obviously in an accessible way.
Yeah.
And for people who aren't able to do that, the service should be made available in other ways, whether it's face to face, whether it's on the phone, whether it's paper. Yes. That's how I think it should be done, really.
Yeah. So there should still be this multi-channel approach, isn't it? That's really key.
I think so. I think often, and I've certainly been guilty of this in the past, you can end up in your urgency and enthusiasm for making things digital and transforming the way things work. It's easy to end up kind of overcorrecting, and there might be deliberate overcorrection, as I think it was, particularly with the government digital service at the start, saying everything has to be digital, everything has to be changed, and so on and so forth, in order to push that change that you need. But that doesn't mean that absolutely everything has to be digital, and you can't talk about other channels or talk about having a mixture of ways to access a service.
Right. Yeah. No, that's an important point. I think this idea of digital, and we're talking about skills as well. I think it would be useful to go into that a bit more if we can. So for here, looking at it from the outside, not being part of, as you say, non-profit or charities or the government, whatever we call tech for good, as we've talked about already. So standing outside of that, this idea of, okay, services need to be digitized, or how we work should be digitized, etc. Do you think that there is a gap between the private and public sectors? As in from a private sector point of view, that ship has sailed, it's moved on, people are now looking at other things, whereas it's still an issue within the public sector or within non-private sector settings, if we can say it like that. What are your thoughts there?
I mean, I think everywhere it's not a debate that lots of people are online, that our services need to be online and so on. I don't, at least in the worlds that I move in, and the people I encounter from other backgrounds, there's, you know, other disciplines, it's not really a debate anymore, as you say. I haven't found a great deal of that's not the right way to say it. I was going to say I haven't found much difference between sectors.
Okay.
Actually, what I've found is it's patchwork within sectors.
Right.
So I've worked with areas of the private sector that are really advanced. I've worked with areas of government that are way more advanced than private sector organisations that I've worked with. I think it's really individual, and it depends on what the organisation has prioritised and how they've set it up, really.
Okay. No, that's right. Because where I'm going, I suppose, and where I think would be interesting to explore is in your role as someone of a level of seniority, that there is an expectation, or you're typically going in as part of some kind of transformation or some effort to make change happen, right? So what are you focusing on in terms of when that happens? What is how do you define the digital aspect that you're looking to change or transform? What can you tell us a bit more about that? I think it'd be interesting to our viewers as well, just to understand that role a bit more and how it, you know, how you apply it and where you're applying it.
Absolutely, and there's definitely a bit of a contradiction or tension, because I've introduced myself as a digital director. I've talked about bringing digital skills and so on, but the last thing that I want to talk about or lead with, particularly at the start of a new role, is talking about digital,
right? Okay,
or even change or transformation, because I think where I've seen things not work, and where I've definitely got things off to not the best start in the past, is kind of setting up that duality, which easily turns into a rivalry between like digital or tech or new or whatever the new thing is, versus what already exists. So and I think that's very easy to do because of the enthusiasm for digital and new and how things, and exciting vision of how things could be. But what I've learned is to avoid that, because it just gets everyone's backs up.
right?
And actually, and also it's not the real reason why I'm interested in it. Why I'm really interested in it is, how can these tools, these ways of working, help to deliver a great service and to deliver the organisation's objectives? So that's what I foreground much more now. So it's rare within, you know, an assignment or a role that I will lead with digital. What I try and start with is what the organisation is aiming to achieve, its purpose, its objectives, and then how myself, my team and others can play a role in achieving those objectives. Only once we've gone through that will we talk about the means of doing so.
So this is actually quite interesting, because personally I'm quite a numbers guy, and I know that a lot of people are actually looking at KPIs, OKRs. So how do you actually measure the social benefit of your services, especially when they're digital? Because it's easy to maybe confuse where the impact comes from other areas, and how do you know that the investment or the transformation to digital of this or more effort in the digital aspect actually makes sense?
So you the metrics that we would use day to day are really quite similar to what would be used on other services. So you're looking at, you know, how many people are using it, who's using it, are they getting through the journey, what's how long they're spending on the page, or are they completing the journey, all that kind of thing. It's just that the purpose is different in this case. So instead of, say, making a purchase, it might be that they're looking to claim a benefit or get advice on something. So sometimes the things that you measure change, but you have that kind of data going on all the time. Typically what that is then runs alongside is broader evaluation that's usually done by an impact team or evaluation team within the organisation, and they are specialists, often from an economics or social research background, in understanding what's the impact of the different the different interventions that the charity is doing, and what does that look like in terms of overall social impact and numbers, whether that's ideally in a way that you can quantify the impact on people's lives and also the financial benefits of the work.
Thank you.
Yeah, no, that's great. That's really fascinating. I wanted to go back to what you touched on earlier about getting people's backs up. Really interesting. And no,
Yes.
it's an important point, and I think this is something our viewers probably will appreciate if we can delve into that a bit more, especially around we're talking about change, right? And introducing new ways of working, a new approach to things that maybe people are not used to or not comfortable with, perhaps, or not ready for. All those factors, right, come into play, and then to couple with the fact, in your case, as you described it, you're a new person to the organization. So I mean that sounds really like intense and tough. Well, it can be tough. I don't know. So let's find out what experiences have you had and how have you dealt with them? Is it if we can say it like that? I mean, what can you share? And yeah, what experiences can you share with that?
Absolutely. Well, it can be intense and tough, and it can also be so rewarding.
Yeah.
Particularly for me, the numbers and being able to quantify the impact of work, as TK guided us to talk about. I suppose I'm very motivated by having a good service. So just a service that's meet users' needs, that operates well, just makes me really very happy, regardless of the context or the purpose. That gives me a quite deep satisfaction.
Nice.
So that is something that I will really prioritize, and I suppose that for me is the bedrock amongst, whatever. There's always stuff swirling around an organization, right? It might be a wave of positivity. It might be some great wins that you've had. It might be a change of personnel that's making people feel uncomfortable. It might be just lost a big contract, or there's a worry about performance. There's always that swirl going on.
Yeah.
So, but what is also always going on is the service and what it's delivering. So that I make my priority to think about, my priority to work on, and also that's the thing that keeps me going.
Right.
So I think for me that's the key, is to focus on that as the priority. To be honest, that I'm not saying that because it's a guarantee of success or a guarantee of popularity, because even that might be irritating to people, but that's my particular focus.
Well, I mean, I get what you're saying. You're talking about outcome focus and looking at the results and the benefit and that kind of thing, which is all great. But I think what's interesting, I think what people are really interested in is that it's the stuff in between. So how do you, I suppose, create the environment that allows those people to think differently, or to even consider this alternative possibility to the outcomes that you're talking about, right? Because you're coming in and say, well, hold on a minute, the way you've been doing it all this time, yes, great, but here's a different way which could get our outcomes, I don't know, quicker, better, faster, whatever it is, or more accurate. How do you make that sell? So how do you bridge that gap? How do you get people to cross that chasm, whatever metaphor we want to use? What kind of things do you do to help make that happen?
Yeah, I guess there's two levels that I would approach that on. And one is working personally. So on my best day, approaching it with humility and curiosity to try and understand, where are people coming from, what works for them, what works about the things that they've always used, even if I have an inkling there might be a different or better way. And really trying to dig around within them as humans to understand that, and provide forums as well for them to say they don't agree or they don't understand, where we can talk one-on-one with each other, as opposed to in some kind of leadership forum.
Right.
And also in a one-to-one basis, you can also, I think it's easier to agree to disagree.
Okay.
which I think
All right.
is something we kind of often don't want to let in as an option in transformation context, but actually sometimes it's okay to be different and have different views, and things don't have to be the same everywhere.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of sort of personal kind of approach I would want to take, which
Yeah.
takes an awful lot of time
Yeah.
and is a real was a real learning for me when I started doing leadership roles, how different it was, because that was so much of the work that I did. On the other hand, though, at the same time, what I would be trying to do is just get started and show what the difference could be, or how things could work.
Yeah.
Yes, you might win something that feels often a bit like an argument, but it's always going to be, you might feel you can win on theory, but who knows if you're going to actually, if you're able to demonstrate something, that's of course all the more powerful. It's something that actually gets easier to do, I think, the more senior you are, because you have more ability to create space for little side projects or for things to happen. So it's not, I know it's not something that everyone could do, and it's not something that I've been able to do for a lot of my career, but that would be the ideal as well, is to get something going that sort of shows how things could be better.
Yeah, amazing. Okay, so just showing some value in order to, I presumably, create that trust or start creating that engagement with those individuals that,
and move it on from a conversation or kind of two opposing people or two opposing ways of doing to something practical that people can get behind.
Yeah, that's really good. Before I move on, just for a quick note for our viewers, if you've got obviously questions, comments, or you disagree or agree, or please put some comments in the chat. We're looking at them as we're talking, and definitely refer to them if we need to later on or as we go. So do put them in. It's interesting. So you've touched on leadership a little bit. I'm going to come back to that later on because I think that's a whole useful conversation in itself. But in terms of the change element and the transformation element, we obviously we're talking about, we're here. Part of our chat here is around agility, agile ways of working, and that's what maybe some of our viewers are here for as well. So let's just touch on that a little bit in terms of, in your view, is it important, is it not, when it comes to tech for good in a broader sense? And if it is, why do you think so, and where do you see it making sense and the value it can bring to consumers of services, but also to the service deliverers as well?
Yeah, absolutely. This is probably going to be a long one, so
go for it.
Settle in. I guess I think of it as being particularly important on two levels, and one is sort of for the team or the teams that are doing this kind of work, and the second is for the organisation more broadly. So what I won't be talking about so much is the kind of generic benefits of agile around, because I believe them, and I think they probably don't need repeating for people on the call. But all of that, let's just bank it. When it comes to setting up and particularly keeping teams working in perhaps government or charities or other organisations that aren't sort of majority tech, I think there's it's really important to have those kind of proper ways of working in place, because you need people to work there with those skills. You're already saying, don't work for a tech company or an agency, come and work for this different kind of organisation. You can't then say, and we work in a way that you don't really like, and you probably won't release anything in 3 years, but come and have maybe. It's all the more important to be providing those really good ways of working. And I have to say that, and I'm not talking about my own teams here, lots of the ways of working in digital and tech teams outside the private sector, I've seen be really, really excellent, which I think is something that maybe isn't talked about so much, but actually you do you do get to experience industry leading ways of working and really be able to experiment and push what's possible, often in these contexts, partly because we need to make it that way so that you'll come and you'll stick around.
You'll stay.
So that's, I suppose, the team level.
Right.
Then thinking about the wider organization, I think there's just such a challenge in government and non-profits, as there always has been, but which is getting more and more acute, which is that there is less money to do things and there is more and more need or demand. And I think there are things that an agile mindset can really bring organizations that offer ways of, you can't resolve that tension, it's not resolvable. There is too much demand and too little money, and too little supply, but there is a set of tools in agile that I think are so useful. One is around prioritizing. So it is so hard often to prioritize, particularly in a charity, because lots of the things that you're wanting to do, maybe all of the things that you want to do, are like gonna help or gonna make an impact for the cause that you're working towards. So agile brings a lovely set of prioritization tools that can be so helpful there. I think those prioritization tools are particularly powerful because they can be set up in a way that involves so many people, so that there's ways for everyone to input, to perhaps share some of those trade-offs and have their say as well. So I think they're doubly powerful for that reason. I think also it's in things like road mapping and being transparent about where things are and what's going on, that can really help with working at a sustainable pace, because there's so much to do. It feels like there's so little time and money. You're trying to do everything. Actually, it's hard to strip back to what is really sustainable for the organization and teams to deliver. And I think the agile tools that make that kind of planning and road mapping really transparent can be so helpful there, because they make much more visible the kind of trade-offs and decisions that are being made, and help people perhaps speak up a bit more when there's just an impossible amount of stuff to do. And my last one is, I think, around helping take small bets. I think there's still quite a lot of focus, understandably, on like what's the one big thing that we can do, what's the one thing that tech will solve for us. But of course, you don't need me to tell you concepts of breaking things down and just taking the smallest possible piece, trying multiple different things. I think the more of that is done, the better, in the context especially where there isn't much to go around.
Amazing. Some really good a good list of things, and a nice summary of aspects of agility that you think are quite valid or valuable, in within Tech for Good more broadly. Thank you so much. I wanted to go into a little bit of detail there around but I think you've touched on it, but we'll go through it anyway, which is what do you think are the biggest challenges charities, non-profits, or if it's government, what are they facing right now? I think you've touched on it, some of it, you've touched on it in some of your answer already, but from what you see, you're close to it, what are those challenges? And I think the follow-on would be then, in your view, how could adopting agility have an impact in their ability to deal with those challenges? But maybe let's start with the first one first, which is what are those challenges that you're seeing, and then we can come back to that follow-on question.
Yeah, I mean, I think the core challenge really is around the scale of challenges and demand for services and support in the context of already reduced and reducing resources. Really, I think it all comes back to that. When we I suppose take a kind of tech or digital slant on that, then there are particular challenges around organizations finding the ability to set up or hire these teams or create relationships with suppliers and so on. But it all really comes back to the resource challenges and the level of demand. So yeah, I guess Agile can help there in, I think, probably the ways that I've mentioned around creating a good environment for people to work with, making sure that things get out to market or to service users in as quickly as possible, and making sure that prioritization decisions are taken in in as good a way as possible when no decision is ideal.
Fair enough. Okay. No, that's good answers there. Thank you, Rebecca. Because I think one thing, obviously, here in the UK, as you know, we all know, there is obviously a huge pressure on public services. Funding is, dwindling, if not very, very difficult to see if there is sometimes. So I'm curious, how do you apply some of what you're talking about when perhaps these organizations, charities, can't even afford maybe to keep some of these skilled staff on board? I mean, how do they deal with that? So because of that, where I'm going is, like, are there ways that they can maybe leverage agility, even if they don't have all the skills there, to make something happen? I don't know if that's even a thought. What do you think? How can we? What are your thoughts on that?
Absolutely. So I guess the key thing, I guess, if you were, say, a charity CEO or someone I was chatting to who'd basically explained that issue to me,
right,
they would probably be saying, we want to do more online, or we want a better website, or words to that effect, but we don't have the money, and we can't hire people.
Yes.
There are a number of things that I would talk about. So I would probably focus on what's the absolute minimum that they can do,
right? Okay.
How to make themselves available to their service users. So that for me would be the priority. So choosing the service users over the stakeholders, finding out where those people are online, if they are online. And then working out what is the absolute minimum that they can do. Is it running one social media account, or is it a very simple WordPress web page? Is it perhaps calling on volunteers, or specifically looking for volunteers or trustees who can help them with this? Particularly so that they can narrow it down to something that they can do sustainably.
Brilliant.
There are organizations out there that can help. CAST is a fantastic one. Digital Candle is another, where people can access some of these resources. And what I've also found, so this is if an organization is perhaps a little more mature or has a bit more ambition in the area, is that sometimes organizations can seek funding specifically for this kind of work. That's often a place where I will become involved with a charity, because they want someone on their board who has these skills in order to get the funding, because getting the funding requires that they have someone on the board who can, they can show that it will get the appropriate oversight and so on. So those two things often come together. And although trusteeing isn't for everyone, I do think it's something that so many people in our sector could really make a big impact, especially for small organizations, helping them work out what works for them in terms of digital and agile, I think that's a real way for them to meet some of their needs, and for individuals to contribute as well.
No, thanks, Rebecca. Some really good ideas there, and good tips. So if any of our viewers are working in those sectors or in those settings, then do listen to what Rebecca's is saying. There's some really good insights and tips. We've got a bit of time left, and I wanted to just move on to leadership. I did say I was going to come back to that, so let's use the remaining time, and then we have a couple of questions too as well. So if we can leave some time to attend to those questions, that would be awesome. So thank you, viewers. And if you have more, then please do stick them in the chat. So on the point of leadership, I think, given the type of roles you've been in and you are in right now in the work you're doing, what are some, and maybe these are for our viewers as well, as kind of like your insights or tips, if you want to say it like that. But can you share some leadership practices, behaviors that have served you well, perhaps in the roles that you've done? And can you try and share them, summarize them in some way for us?
Yeah, I think the thing that's been most helpful for me in leadership roles is being able to be really clear on what I care about, and then being able to exhibit that to other people.
Okay,
I
nice.
find terms like leadership style or leadership values a bit hard to get my head around. Like I'm often not sure what people really mean when they say that.
Okay.
But I do know what's important to me. I know what I prioritize, and I know what matters, which I think is maybe a bit like values. So I know that I'm very clear that what I care about is a good service that meets the needs of our users, equity, and staff well-being. They are the three things that I care about most. Obviously, an organisation will also have objectives and so on, which I would follow, but they are my kind of key three drivers. And so it's taken a long time to figure those out and to be able to articulate them in a short number of words. But that has been so valuable, because then I know what motivates me. I know the kind of roles I want to do. I know where I'm going to get joy and where I'm going to experience difficulties in different roles. And then I can exhibit those. So I am really clear.
There's a virus going on with technical difficulties. It definitely, maybe I'm spreading it, Arif.
Oh dear.
But hopefully Rebecca will come back to us.
Yeah, I hope she
in
does.
the meantime, maybe we can
Yes.
talk about our next session. So let me quickly give you a screen share of what's happening next.
Well,
So Arif, what are we having in 2 weeks?
Well, while we hope Rebecca is coming back to us with whatever the tech challenges are, we're back with another episode of our Agile Fireside Chat on the 22nd of June. Apologies on behalf of us today where we had some tech difficulties.
One after another, right?
Yeah, it's been a bit of a nightmare, but we're back on the 22nd. We're talking to John McGuinness, who is a talent development professional, all skilled in all things talent development and people development in organizations. He's been around.
And he works in a very interesting organization, but
yes,
to see that,
very
you
interesting.
probably need to come along. Yeah,
exactly. Come along and hopefully listen to his conversation with us in a couple of weeks' time. Details will be coming out later after we finish here today with Rebecca. Although I'm hoping we haven't finished with Rebecca, because we were in some really good conversation, and there are some
we were about
conversations.
leadership, and this was quite interesting. Yes, so here's Rebecca back. So I'll stop my share and we can continue.
Thank you. Sorry, Rebecca.
I'm not sure what happened there.
That's the virus we're spreading with technical difficulties. Nothing works today.
I was in a good flow.
Do continue.
Yes, you were in a brilliant flow. So we were talking, I think, about leadership practices, behaviors, and I think your general point around demonstrating your values and what's important to you, wasn't it, Rebecca? That's what you were talking about.
Absolutely. I think that was a perfect summary.
That was it. Okay, that was a summary. Brilliant. Okay, so there we go. So we've talked about values being really important and demonstrating those, and why it's important to kind of stand with that as a forefront in terms of whatever you do in your role. There was something else we want to talk about. Well, let's touch on it if we can. And I'm sorry we have compressed it a bit with other things, but on the topic of leadership, dealing with your peers. So if you're in a leadership role, as you have been, as you are currently, dealing with your peers who may not be doing the same thing as you, of course, in terms of tech for good or digital type work. What are the biggest things that have challenged you in that respect? Where have you found that to be quite either challenging or rewarding?
I think the ones that have often the challenging ones and the rewarding ones are the same, right? Is where I've experienced people who are just kind of very, I come across as very close. I find them very closed.
Very close, right?
To be honest,
Okay.
might be because I've done something inadvertently that has made them feel, choose to react in that way. And they are the people that I enjoy working with most. I say enjoy,
Fascinating.
it's often through gritted teeth. That is where I want to draw on my ability to be curious and to be
Right.
humble and to put
Yes.
myself in someone else's shoes
Yeah,
and make it my mission to try and understand and empathize with that person. I think I used to focus too much on feeling like I wanted to like them, or I wanted them to like me.
Like me, yeah,
Have
yeah.
this great kind of vibe.
Yeah.
I've given up on that.
Right.
It's nice when it happens, but not essential. But
Okay.
yeah, mate, really try and understand where they're coming from, and often what it is they're afraid of, or
Right.
what it is that they're worried about. And that is really, really interesting, because I think it's always interesting to meet people who are different from you and learn about them, and maybe learn something about yourself as you do it.
Yes.
But yeah, really investing that time is one of the biggest challenges and one of the greatest rewards.
Amazing. Thank you. So in summary, I think you should being curious, humility and empathy as key skills when it comes to dealing with peers or other leaders or anyone, I suppose, really, when it comes to change and transformation. Humans, it's humans, exactly. So I think just to wrap it up, before we go to to our questions, just to wrap up the conversation, for our viewers today, what would be, from your perspective, 3 things that they should take away after listening to you today? What would be those 3 things? What would you like the takeaways to be for them?
I think considering tech for good or kind of public purpose work as part of your career, if it's not something that you haven't considered before, whether that's a job, whether it's volunteering, whether it's perhaps being a trustee, but thinking of that as something that is open to you and that could be really, really rewarding to work in.
Nice.
I think being clear about what matters to you in your work and those kind of values or priorities has been so beneficial to me and is beneficial in my work. And the third one, which comes along with that, is finding a way to let people know that, so that you can be understood yourself, because that also, because it's nice to be understood and feel recognized,
yes,
but also because it then opens up for them to learn, to share about themselves and in turn be understood.
Amazing. Okay, so thank you, Rebecca, for answering for the discussion, for the conversation, for answering all the questions as well. It's been great fun having you, and some great summary points to end on there for our viewers. So tech for good, do think about that as part of your career, and of course, we hope you enjoyed today's conversation and learning some really, really important insights from Rebecca as well. Let's go to the questions. We got 2 that we want to address. So Sergio has asked a question around how would you suggest navigating an agile way of working where an organization is heavily dependent on third-party vendors that may not adopt an agile way of working? So you're working in an organization and they're heavily dependent on third-party vendors or suppliers, and those vendors or suppliers are probably not interested in working in an agile way. Then they don't need to, they don't want to. So how would you deal with that type of situation if you have dealt with that, Rebecca?
Sergio, that's really hard.
That's a hard one, isn't it? Not easy.
Hard to deal with and a hard question to answer. I mean, I think you have to use all the levers that you have as the client, around setting the direction, how you're going to, in that relationship, how you're going to evaluate whether their service provision is good, contract renewals and all that kind of thing. If they won't budge, and also if their service isn't performing, that makes it easier. If they're just not performing, it's really hard if they're actually performing. Then
an interesting thing to say, Rebecca.
change the supplier.
Change the supplier. If you can, isn't it? Change the supply. That would be your
You
advice.
can, yeah.
Brutal,
if you
but
can.
true. Yeah.
Very true. Okay, fair enough. It's a difficult one to answer, but that's a reasonable response. So thank you, Rebecca, for
Yeah, I
giving
mean,
that
that
one a
wouldn't be
go.
my first, it wouldn't be my first option,
No, it
but
wouldn't be. But yeah,
sometimes you have to.
sometimes you have to. No, that's a fair one. I think Will's got another question that might be a bit more easier to. Well, I think it's a really interesting one, which is his experience in large private organizations has been that, and we know that, having worked with them as ourselves as well, is organizations, businesses are typically incentivized in such a way that makes agility quite difficult. You know, long-term incentives or long-term goals, long-term planning, etc. Have you found any of those challenges within the public sector work that you do? Any structural issues like that? What has he said? E.g., yeah, quarterly target settings, meaning no one can take a decision, / pre-agreed team goals, meaning you can't change priorities. Have you seen any of that happen?
Yeah, I have experienced some of that, definitely. I would say I've experienced it more in the private sector than in tech for good environments. Yeah, I think what the best you can do is what's the word, pull on all those agile and ways of working tools that you have available, whether you choose to call them that or not, if that's not what people talk about. And I think a key kind of tactical thing that you can aim to do is, even if everything's kind of swirling or quite stuck, is really focus on teams. So keeping teams together, keeping teams stable, and kind of having that as your core unit of how you think about things. So ideally funding, delivery, all of that can live in its on its own timescales. But if you can keep stable teams who are working on the same thing and who can focus, then that means that team members will feel happier, and also that work will get done to the degree that the organization allows. But I feel for you, that's tough.
It is tough. Okay.
It is.
So it's not as prevalent, and it's all and your view is it's about having that stable team approach to provide that motivation and purpose for them to want to do the best job they can, right? So that's what we're talking about. Okay. Amazing. Thank you so much, Rebecca. We have run over by a few minutes. Apologies to our viewers, but I think it was worthwhile. We had a great conversation, really interesting talking points, and we've learned a lot from you. So thank you so much for your time, Rebecca. It's been a pleasure hosting you and having you. Yeah, and having you join us. Any closing words from you, TK?
Just anything? That, sorry for the technical difficulties and changing the stream location. Thank you for joining us. I was busy, trying as always to manage technical details. They just never let me go. But it's been a huge pleasure to host you, Rebecca, and see you hopefully on our next wonderful events. Tomorrow we have the Humble Breakfast Jam at 10 a.m. If you have some time, Rebecca, do join us. We always talk about interesting topics. And
do you want to get the poster back up so we can just remind our viewers of what's coming?
I shall try. Nowadays, with the virus of non-working technology, it is quite difficult, but I think I'll manage, Harry. There you go.
There we go. Yeah, so just as a reminder for all our viewers before we leave, we're back in a couple of weeks' time. We're talking to John McGuinness, talent development professional, who works in a very interesting organization. We're really excited to hear from him and his thoughts on people, all things people, talent, agility as well. So tune in for that. Details will be coming out later today. But if that's everything from us, I think. Thank you again for your time and your engagement and your questions. Really inspiring and interesting talking to you, Rebecca, again. And we'll see you soon. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye, everyone.
Stopping. So you don't have to